It is the Anfield Wrap. I'm Neil Atkinson, and with me, I've got Phil Blundell, Gareth Roberts, and Adam Smith. We are in association with The Athletic. Coming up, I'm talking to James Pearce about the piece he's written about Being Liverpool, which was a lot of fun to look back on and remember. Mostly laugh at it rather than with it. Although the piece does do a couple of interesting things around the fact that the people who made the thing feel as though it did what it wanted them to do, and I'll be bringing that up with James as he spoke to them. If you want to sign up to The Athletic, it's theathletic.co.uk/The Anfield Wrap for that. And I will be speaking to Maria Eagle about Hillsborough Law, something that she's looking to start the process of getting through the Commons on Wednesday. She's obviously not going to be able to finish that process on Wednesday, but around how families of people who are afflicted by huge disasters are able to garner the same support as organisations. Very serious thing that is to come. But what we've been doing with these shows through the lockdown, when there isn't any news breaking, and just very briefly, Gareth, it was interesting to me. There was a lot of briefing before the last Premier League meeting that loads of stuff was on the table, etc., etc. They have the meeting, they come out and they issue the statement, which is nothing's changed. We still want to get the season finished, and this seems to now be the pattern and the cycle.
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? I said on Talking Reds the other day, I was annoyed by a piece that the BBC carried, which was clearly briefed from, at best one or two parties, and I suspect one. But it didn't name its source, and it was all along the lines of, they're going to discuss it being jibbed, they're going to discuss it not being played out and all that kind of thing. And then it seems that was never really on the agenda. So that was obviously someone's agenda, but it wasn't on the agenda. And then today, you've got the Brighton chairman saying it's never ever been discussed to null and void it. That's never been an option that they've been looking into. It is an option that they're looking at League One and League Two level of teams now, and that doesn't particularly surprise me given the obvious difference in finances and TV money and all the rest of it. But for the Premier League, it's just being kicked into the grass again, hasn't it? And there's no real sort of, the line appears to be like the rest of the big leagues in Europe. They want to get it done, they want to get it finished, and that's good news for us as Liverpool fans, because we obviously want to see us lift this trophy that we deserve.
Phil, it does feel like we're just on this sort of merry-go-round. The 48 hours before one of these, the 48 hours after one of these, there's going to be loads and loads of people filling a void of noise. It seems like the EFL's comms are much more straightforward, yet the EFL don't have quite the same, obviously, pressures that the Premier League have in terms of feeding a wider beast. But it does just seem to be the pattern now. That's what we're going to be putting up with for every single one of these meetings.
Feels like people are putting an idea out just to see how it's received before there's a meeting, and then if there's sort of positivity around the idea, you can walk into the meeting and go, right, I've got this great idea, lads, people are on board, look, I've got 2,000 tweets here that say, oh yeah, that's good, whereas they're actually getting the complete opposite, and then they just go, well, let's just forget about that one, we'll come up with another one of these in a couple of weeks, and we'll find a better idea, because they just seem to be, all they're doing at the minute is an ideas thing, isn't it? Because we don't know when we're going to be able to do anything. We don't know how long they're going to be able to do anything. They don't know anything, so it's just a lot of guessing at the minute.
Yeah, Adam, I'm not expecting anything to change. We'll come on now and we'll talk about Klopp and the going right the way back to 2016 at this point. But I'm just not expecting anything to change for about another 3 weeks until the medical situation's clearer.
I don't see how it does change. I don't know what could possibly be different, really. But I think that's generally true of everything around the country. I'm very much in the kind of how exactly do people expect the lockdown or whatever to be lifted when there's no cure or anti-vaccine or anything else. I don't get it. I'm very much in the kind of camp of I think we're going to be in this kind of for the long haul, really, until there's some reason why things can change. And I think that reason point is the one that for me is the most valid one, in the sense of if somebody turned around and said, listen, we're going to void the season, sorry Liverpool, you're not going to win the title, but here's the reason why, and here's why we can guarantee that the next season will start in August, and why that next season is more important than completing this one, then I'd go, okay, fine. But nobody's ever going to be able to do that, because there's literally no reason why starting the next season is more important than finishing this one. And that's where I just think that's what we're going to, you can't convince me otherwise. So let's just do that, because even if we start the next one, there's no guarantee that we're not going to have to shut it all down again anyway. So it's mad to me that anybody other than those with vested interests could think, let's just void the season.
Logical, consistent thought, not being fantastic amongst people who run football clubs. over the long term, who'd have thought it? Seems unlikely, but then we are where we are. All right, then what we've been doing has been looking back to key games in Jurgen Klopp's tenure on the Anfield Wrap. Key games to tell the story of part of why we've ended up where we've ended up. And in a sense, Gareth, for me, it's almost disassociated with Klopp, the first game we're going to discuss, and the actual match itself, other than the fact that possibly Sunderland get 2 late goals, isn't all that important. There's a load of reasons why I think it's disassociated with Klopp, the 2-2 against Sunderland. But I think it's actually a bit of a trick that everything that plays on people's minds, where because the way it's been with Klopp and the importance of supporters to Klopp and the way in which he's gone about his communications, it sort of feels as though there was no Liverpool manager when we walked out over the ticket price against Sunderland, rather than the idea that it happened during the tenure of Brendan Rodgers or Jurgen Klopp.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I mean, he obviously physically wasn't there because of his appendix operation, and Linders was in charge that day. So there's that aspect of it. But I think as well, you got to think back to why we were doing it and why we were walking out that day and what it was all about. And it was over ticket price, and it wasn't anything to do with the football side of things, really. So it wasn't really one for the manager anyway, and it wasn't directed towards the manager from us. I mean, you think about the chants inside and outside the ground that day. They were about the owners. They were about the owners being greedy bastards and enough is enough and all that kind of stuff. I think what's interesting though is, when you read back now and you look back, Klopp obviously did have a say in the end, did intervene, did say, listen, this is spoiling my plan. I do want everyone on the same page. I do need these fans, in the boat with us, if you like. And it's interesting, again, looking back, I was never his biggest fan at the time. The comments from Ian Ayre are awful. And then, you've got Pep Linders, who, at that stage and even now hasn't done many press conferences. Yeah, manages to say post-match, the fans are well within the rights to do this. Whereas Ian Ayre's coming out and saying, be careful what you wish for. And all this sort of like aggressive stuff, which didn't really work. And, I think as well that, some of Ian Ayre's comms around it were disingenuous, in that, he tried to talk about that there is a line of communication between fans and the club. And yes, there was. But they went away from that. That was the problem. And we know that for a fact. We know that there was conversations over a long period of time about what this ticket and structure should have been at the time. And then we know that they suddenly diverted away from that and come up with £77 tickets and £1,029 season tickets. And that was what got up people's nose. That was the step too far. That was the step away from, when they've been talking to fans. Their own ticket and working group is referenced in the Spirit of Shankly statement after the walkout, because they went away from that. And I think that's the key thing to say. But the good thing, like with the thing recently with the furlough, the good thing is that they listened, and they listened quickly. They reversed the decision. They said they got it wrong. And to me, there's a lot of people in the corporate world, the executive world, whose egos don't allow them to do those things. So they deserve some credit for that.
I mean, Phil, where we end up is that, since then, I think it's changed the landscape for ticket prices in general, right the way across the country. I'll come back to that in a minute or two. But at the time, and both the build up to it and then the act of doing it, it was a wrench of a thing to do. But the numbers who did was genuinely remarkable. Having been involved with Spirit of Shankly based stuff and sort of felt at times a little bit like, you did feel at times like banging your head against a brick wall. The numbers who do this, I just thought were spectacular. And I think that if you were the club, I think that's as much of a tipping point, and not just for the Liverpool Football Club, but for clubs full stop in the Premier League, as anything else. It is a phenomenal number who make the difficult decision, who make the wrench to all make the dart.
Yeah, I was amazed by how many it was. I remember thinking, it'll be 3,000-4,000, something like that. And then I can get where I sit, I can get out the ground pretty quickly. And I was waiting outside home base with people, and I took a video on my phone and stood there for probably 5-10 minutes, and it was a stream of people, and you would honestly have not known that the match was. You would have thought quite feasibly that the match had actually finished. It was that many people. The volume of people was that high. I also thought that from a footballing point of view, it says everything about how the whole thing is, that the match did actually finish 2-0. Finished 2-0 from being 2-0 at the time that everyone left, because it sort of made such a strong statement that there is an importance of fans in this, and that, you know, it's a saying that people obviously get quite a lot recently, is the football without fans is nothing, but football in an Anfield that's half empty does not look anywhere near what it should be, and it's made such a statement that we were able to blow a 2-0 lead against a team who were absolutely terrible. I've got the league table up here, and they had 19 points from 24 games, and they'd scored 28 goals or something. They were not good, and they've come back from 2-0 down, and we've all got off. But it almost didn't feel like it was actually a football match. It was almost like bigger than that, and whatever the score wasn't actually going to matter anyway.
I think it was a strange evening, full stop, in the ground around the game, Adam, and I think in the build-up it did feel like something else was going on, and in a sense there's almost perfect timing from a supporters' point of view here. You know, it's quite the perfect storm, not just for Liverpool Football Club, but sort of for the Premier League. Liverpool are the ones who are most likely to be able to pull something like this off. The next part of it is, in a league season that's sort of petering out towards nothingness, a home game against Sunderland makes it pretty straightforward. You know, there was a lot of things within it that did make it a perfect timing from a protesting point of view, in a sense.
Definitely, yeah, definitely, and I think it's funny how sometimes these things all just come together in a neat little, a neat little package to mean that it can have more of an impact than maybe people think. And as Phil said, the fact that we dropped that 2-goal lead, it's almost like that the players wanted to be part of the story, because that painted a really good picture of how important fans are when that sort of thing can happen. And I didn't actually go that day anyway, because it was somebody's birthday. I can't remember who, but somebody's birthday. So I went. I was out having afternoon tea with my wife-to-be and father-in-law, which was less than fun. But it was the conversation at the time. Even there, he was asking what's going on, why are they doing it, what's happening, and it dominated that, and I was annoyed that I wasn't there. And normally when I can't go to a match that I've got a ticket for, I'm annoyed because I can't watch the football. But I was annoyed that I couldn't go because I wanted to walk out, if you see what I mean. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to be there and be part of it and make the point. And it's just that kind of everything sort of swirled together to really be able to make a much stronger message than if it had been, like one where Liverpool just won 4-0. And that was it, and everybody left on 77, but we were already 4-0 up by that point, and then the game just petered out. It wasn't that; it was the way it happened made it a bigger story, and it gave, I always remember Jay McKenna getting that line. I can't remember if it was BBC or Sky or someone he was talking to, and he said, "Yeah, it's almost like fans make a difference, isn't it?" or something like that. And it gave that became the tag that everything could be hung on to really drill the point home.
It was also the visuals of it, Gareth, as well. The black flags before the game. The removal of a lot of the stuff that the cop can do. That again, even now, it genuinely feels like. I mean, as I say, it doesn't even feel like 5 years ago. It really strangely almost feels like 10. It's because it was such a brief period of time in terms of the desire to make the point being made, and then, as you said before, the club doing the sensible thing. It all turns itself around in what is about 8 or 9 days. So the whole thing just has this strange sort of. It's almost an anachronism. It almost feels like it sits out of time. And I remember those black flags, and it was an unbelievably powerful statement.
Yeah, it was moody, wasn't it? It was, it looked mad, it felt mad, and there was obviously a very different atmosphere in the ground all the way through. And I think you mentioned before that people were obviously torn about doing it, because it goes against the grain, it goes against the very thing you're in it for, that you want to be part of it, that you want to support your club, and to walk away on 77 minutes. Was a big thing, and like we all said, the numbers were incredible, because I think one of the things that Spy and Klopp, Spirit of Shankly, and even us, we threw our weight behind it at the time, and we had a lot of conversations around it. We did like a live thing with Spirit of Shankly, seem to remember, and things like that. If that had all sort of gone wrong and it hadn't been backed by numbers, then everyone could have looked a little bit daft, and we could have been in some kind of weird alternative reality where we're paying 100 quid for footy tickets every week or whatever. So,
or just locked in dispute with an ownership for 6 months at a time when it was what no one needed.
Yeah, but it was supported, it was done well, and the black flags will always stay with me, because it looks so odd. You're always used to seeing the Kop being the centre of Liverpool support, obviously with the flags, with the banners, with the colour, with the noise, and for it to just be like oddly eerie with those huge black flags, it was a great idea. It certainly got the message across, and then obviously the numbers that left got the message across as well. I mean, those numbers were always going to be disputed depending on who said them, but I think I remember the BBC, saying that they estimated 10,000, and so most people went, well, even the BBC said it was 10,000, so don't be saying to me it's any less. And yet the club had to act, and the club had to act quickly. And one of the reports I reread, this morning said the compromise that the manager Jurgen Klopp has called for has resulted in admission prices being frozen at 15, 16 levels. That's what I was saying before about, we always reference when we talk about this, well, Klopp wasn't actually there, but he very quickly, at teams, got involved, even, fairly silently, if you like, behind the scenes.
In the run-up to the game, Gareth, he's really, really interesting, Klopp, in that he basically will not commit. And therefore in not committing, it makes it very, very clear where his loyalties lay. He's been so supportive of the ownership across the entirety of his time here, but on this issue, he very much he manages to make very clear what he thinks without having to explicitly state it.
Yeah, he's handled that well, hasn't he? I mean, I think that was one of the reasons that's one of the reasons why he's done well at Liverpool, if I'm being honest as well. I mean, look, he nails the psychology. He's a great football manager. He's won the European Cup, and we know all this. But also, I'm not having that he's always been on exactly the same page as the owners, and they've all been having like jolly calls across the Atlantic. There will have been times where he's been fuming about things. It's just the nature of it. Decisions will have to be made sometimes you would have thought that he's not entirely on board with. But he just keeps it under. He recognises that the power of him coming out and saying something is huge. And I think as well, after Rodgers, wherever you stand on Brendan Rodgers, and I can't be arsed with that debate again. He did politic. He did go rogue. He did go public with a lot of things that he maybe didn't need to, and maybe wouldn't again now that he's a more experienced manager. So Klopp has been good on that, and Klopp's been clever on it. And there's a reason why I think, people do say it often comes up, could you imagine Klopp being a prime minister? Could you imagine Klopp being in politics? Yeah, I could. Yeah, I very much could.
Last little bit on it, Phil. There's an excellent piece written in the Telegraph by Chris Bascombe afterwards. There's a line in it. Board members of other clubs will pray this is a one-off. A regional eccentricity in a city where football and meaningful political expression often walk side by side. There's something in general, until there was a global pandemic, there was no single incident that led to the Anfield Wrap losing more subscribers than this. There was a feel of internally within English football that it was a general sort of sense of supporters. They were glad it was Liverpool. Externally, it did feel as though globally the case needed to be made amongst Liverpool supporters. It's a reminder when there's lots of things about any mass gathering that are inherently political. People can like that or not like that. People can say they don't want that to be part of their football experience, and I get that, but mass gatherings are inherently political. You can just choose to ignore it. And I think there's something that happens here, isn't there, from Liverpool, which does change the face of English football and has at least sustained for the last 5 years around ticket prices. There have been no mad hikes anywhere. Everyone has, broadly speaking, stuck to the line since this incident.
I think everyone's sort of realised, and one of the big points that was made at the time was how, in the grand scheme of things, relevant that ticket money actually is to the upkeep of a top-level Premier League club nowadays, because the percentage used to be really quite high, and teams used to need season ticket money in the summer to keep them ticking over, for example. If Premier League, I think someone worked out the other year, if Liverpool let everyone in for a tenner, that their financial position would have been break-even 1 year. Now, that tells you that the money isn't actually that important in the grand scheme of things, and I think so. It pointed it out and made people realise that you don't need to exploit fans to a ridiculous level. That fans actually have a purpose in this, and that getting someone to pay £1,000 for a season ticket means that you're going to squeeze people into not coming eventually. And once you lose a certain brand of people, it's very hard to get them back, particularly at Liverpool, where if your season ticket goes, that's it, it's gone forever. You can't do that. And it has been big in the last few years that there's been more of a realisation of A, the importance of fans, and B, that the money that they give isn't going to be that important no matter what you do it, what level you set it to, just because it's a drop in the ocean comparatively.
All right then. Rather more mundanely, Liverpool move on, and the next key game, the next one that stands out to me, even though I actually ummed and ahed about including it, Adam, it's the League Cup final against Manchester City, which was Liverpool's 44th game of this season. It's worth pointing that out in the wider context of a conversation about the whole of this season. We mentioned it last week, how stunned the manager was about almost everything, but in terms of his English experience and number of games. But this is only the 28th of February, and it's Liverpool's 44th game of the season at this stage. And it was a game which simmered rather than boiled. It's, you can maybe in hindsight end up arguing that the defining Premier League rivalry of the last 10 years is Liverpool versus Manchester City, if one takes the long view from 13-14 through to where we've ended up. And maybe, just maybe, this game is a little bit more of a road, a sort of a landmark along the way than A, it felt at the time, where it felt as though we were very much going in as massive underdogs, but B, than the game itself might suggest.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well, isn't it, about what kind of, I don't know what the phrase is I'm looking for, because I don't want to say what signal it sends, but if you turn the result around and we win it, does it maybe mean that the manager is too far ahead of where he should have been at the time, if that makes any kind of sense? And the game, I don't, to be honest, all I remember about the game is a profound sense of disappointment, because of course we lost ultimately, and we didn't. I don't think we played as well as we could have and as well as we were. But yeah, certainly in terms of what the manager is learning and what the manager kind of picked up for his own educational experience in that first kind of half, 3/4 season that he took charge of the club. The fact that a cup final in February is his 44th game, he must have been looking at thinking, this is bonkers, like this is mental. I've got to get used to what kind of level of football these people expect you to play at for an entire season, especially, and I think it might be part of what has kind of seen him over the long term change his strategy a little bit away from that heavy metal football, high pressing, constant going at them thing. And he's kind of looked at it at that stage and gone, there's no way I can do that for a season, especially not if we want to win more than one trophy. There's absolutely no way I can get these lads to run themselves into the ground for 60 plus games. It's just no way.
We go into the game and the manager, firstly, doesn't have a lot of options at centre-half. Gareth, this is another reason why Liverpool went into it as relative underdogs. He starts with Lucas next to Sakho, and then Sakho goes off injured on 25. So Kolo, who's not entirely fit himself, comes off the bench to do the remainder of what becomes. He basically now plays for 100 minutes, frankly, which I don't think will have been the plan for anyone, as he was returning from injury as well. It's a Liverpool side that's relatively strong in there. We can talk more about the football on this one. Yes, there is Klein and Moreno, but also Milner, Coutinho, Lucas, Emre Can, Firmino and Sturridge. Liverpool find themselves through the game. Obviously, as I said before, they go 1-0 down, and the late equaliser, when it comes, was aggressively, virulently celebrated. It was quite the celebration. Wembley up to that point, I think, the new Wembley had disappointed Liverpool supporters. That was the first time I can remember it going properly bananas for everybody.
Yeah, it was good, that celebration, wasn't it? I remember that. I remember people going flying, and it was feeling like a bit of a grim day. It was a weird match, and I think it's weird as well. It can sound bit entitled and all that and blah blah blah, but look, I can only tell you what I felt like, and going to Wembley for a League Cup final in February kind of does feel weird to me. Like, that was weird. I thought even when we won it was a bit weird, and it's become a weird competition, full stop, and that was a weird game as well. But that was a moment where we could just enjoy it. Coutinho had scored. It was right near the end of the match. We'd sort of started to accept the fact that we were trudging off and we'd lost the thing, and then he gave us some hope. Ultimately we do lose the thing, and like Adam saying he can only remember various things about it. I'm a bit like that as well, in that, like, I definitely haven't kept a big space for this game in my mind because we lost. And you're not meant to lose cup finals. Do you know what I mean? It's meant to be a big. And we've been fortunate, haven't we, as Liverpool fans, that in the main we've won them. But losing a cup final is really, really grim because it's also, it spoils everything about it. Obviously, you've made a long journey down. You've got to make a long journey back. You're with your mates and all that, and that bit's good. But like if you're not celebrating, it's not the best, and all of a sudden you feel very tired on a long, long way up from home, and you start to question the money you've spent and all that kind of madness. But I remember staring in this game, and that it was another one where we felt we got to him because he was missing a couple of chances. Something we haven't mentioned about the Sunderland game and this game is it's a reminder again that what a big difference it is having a great keeper, because we didn't have one then. He should have saved Adam Johnson's free kick against Sunderland. He doesn't do great on City's goal in this game, although he does make some makes a couple of other decent saves, I think, in the game. But yeah, I mean, again, think about where we were and think about where we are, and be very glad that we've got a fella with a massive beard in goal now, rather than that fella.
I mean, say what you want, it is a massive beard, Phil, and I'm not just talking about you. There is over the course of the match, it's interesting. Sturridge starts and he actually gets the 120 minutes. I can only presume he was probably down to take the 5th penalty, unless that was Origi. But he goes right the way through the game, Sturridge. And in the story of 15-16, one of the things has always been what the manager thought of Sturridge. Well, he thought enough of him to give him the duration of the League Cup final against Manchester City. He plays a part in getting the equaliser. Liverpool just, when we get to those penalties, they are all, with the exception of Emre Can's and with a specific focus on Philip Coutinho's, pretty dreadful penalties.
I mean, I don't know I think if Robert said he can't remember, does he remember Emre Can actually Panenka the penalty?
It's gorgeous.
It's a proper cool as you like Panenka. It's mad that we lose a penalty shootout 3-1, take 4 penalties, and we actually managed to be 1-0 up after 1 penalty. Because Fernandinho puts it wide, doesn't he, with their first one, and you're like, happy days, 1-0.
I honestly thought we won.
Yeah, we didn't score again. I mean, I remember just going back to Sturridge. I remember someone tried to play him through on about 100 and something minutes, and he tried to sprint, and his legs basically couldn't carry him. And there's a fella behind me, like I just vividly remember this fella behind me, like laying into him, and I'm like, he couldn't move. Like, I don't think he was on a penalty, because I genuinely think he couldn't move. It's interesting that Origi hadn't taken one, Sturridge hadn't taken one, James Milner hadn't taken one either. So James Milner's presumably the one on the 5th penalty, because if you look at that starting lineup, you're thinking that James Milner's actually the likely penalty taker in the 90 minutes. So I mean, maybe it's sort of a bit of actually bad planning, and the thing you really should do.
This is mad penalty
choices. If James Milner takes that second penalty, you go 2-0 up. There's more pressure on Jesus Navas than there is who takes their second penalty. It's a strange thing to not have your best penalty taker. I think in penalty shootout.
Yeah, it should be on 2, 3, or 4. Your best taker should be on 2, 3, or 4. I would argue 3 and 4 as they're likely to be the most.
And this is a great example of why, because you can't. If you've lost, you can't take a penalty.
Yeah,
it's pretty simple.
You can't flip it over.
Just going back to what Adam said earlier about us losing this match, and if it sort of settles back, or it would have had us further forward. One thing it would have done is next year we'd have been in Europe, and I think one of the biggest advantages the season after this is that we were only playing once a week. And because I think if we'd have won this, we'd have actually gone into that daft qualifying round of the Europa League that starts in July.
I think
that would have made a huge difference. It was also why I think it's a different matter going into the Champions League group stage as opposed to the Europa League third qualifying round or whatever it was. Losing the Europa League final, I think, also helped us a little bit in sort of pushing forward, because I think such a big thing about the season after, which is where basically everything we do was sort of built, and when Mane comes in that summer, doesn't he, was sort of built up on the fact that they were playing once a week.
Well, on that, Phil, do you think that's why? So, for instance, we praised, and rightly so, the squad building, the transfer policy, etc. But it is perhaps worth sort of saying, at no point have they had to tool up unexpectedly. So one of the things that happens in the summer of 14 is they've suddenly got a plan for Champions League football. they've got a plan for the idea that basically the intense number of games that are going to get dropped in, and so you end up buying in bulk. Do you think that this is that genuinely it helps Liverpool, the fact that they've always been able to sort of phase the improvements in, rather than feel as though all of a sudden they've got to go from 0 to 60 in a summer?
Yeah, I think if you go back to the summer of 2016, I think the only signings we really made were Mane, Wijnaldum and Klavan. I might be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure that's all we did that summer. Now, if we're playing Europa League or Champions League, we aren't just signing 3 footballers. We've got to sign probably another attacker, probably another midfielder. Probably this is because 16-17 is also the season where James Milner plays left back.
And Matip as well.
And Matip, yeah, Matip is on free as well, obviously. Yeah. So there was a lot that summer that we would have had to do more of if we had had European football. And obviously, it would have been quite nice to win a trophy, win 2 trophies, play in the Champions League. But it was almost like a bit of a sliding doors thing in terms of if this had have happened, where would we be now? You know, it's hard for us to imagine that we'd actually be better, is it? For being realistic. So, best possible scenario is we're exactly the same. And you're not thinking now, we'll tell you what, I'd take being a little bit worse if we did beat Manchester City on penalties 4 years ago.
Absolutely not. Maybe Jürgen saw this coming. It's why he did have Milner down as a taker. Well done, Jürg. Great work, Gaffer, as ever. I am going to shoot off now, and I will be, if you're watching it on YouTube, back talking to Maria Eagle about what's being popularised as called the Hillsborough Law. We'll explain it all. We'll go into it all, me and Maria. Then I'll be chatting to James Pearce, and then I'll be back with Phil, with Gareth, and with Adam to talk about Ryan Brewster and Harvey Elliott. I am joined by Maria Eagle. Now, we're going to talk about something that's being referred to as Hillsborough Law. We'll come on to why it's being called that in a second or two. But obviously, we will be being very careful what we say, Maria and I, to do with the ongoing court cases. Maria knows much more about all of this than I do, but I will trust her judgment throughout. But we are going to talk about a bill that she is bringing to the Commons on Wednesday, ultimately around the idea of a public advocate for families, for the bereaved, for people who suffer terrible things happening to them, Maria, and it's something you've been working on for many years now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I first met the Hillsborough families before I became a Member of Parliament, met some of them when I was a junior lawyer in practice in Liverpool. I wasn't running any of the civil litigation cases, but I did meet some of the families at that time because my principal was involved in those cases. And then some of those same people became my constituents 7 years later when I became the Member of Parliament for what was then Liverpool Garston. And they were some of the first people to come to my advice surgery and ask me for help. And by that time, things had already gone quite wrong. You know, it was already, 8 years after. And a lot of the court cases had happened and things that were going wrong had gone wrong. But at the same time, I also became the secretary of the all-party MV Derbyshire group because my predecessor, Eddie Lloyden, had been a merchant seafarer and had been involved with trying to help the families caught up in that disaster. That was a big bulk carrier that sank in the South China Sea in 1980, and 44 people lost, 42 seafarers, and half of them were from Liverpool. And their families felt like those people who died in the disaster had got blamed. But it was said at the Wreck Commission that it was only quite a new ship. It was only 4 years old when it went down. And so there was this suggestion the families felt that their relatives who died and couldn't defend themselves had somehow been responsible. And so some of the first things I did as an MP was try and help families caught up in these terrible public disasters where people had died. And there were big parallels. Families didn't feel like they were at the centre of the investigations. They felt like they were alienated, the only people who weren't represented in many of these court cases that went ahead. And it didn't feel like the proceedings that were happening were about them getting to the truth or there being any justice for their relatives who died. And it struck me then, and it's only been reinforced since, that we as a society don't really handle these issues well, particularly not to meet the needs of those who've been bereaved and the survivors of these terrible public disasters, which happen now and again. And obviously you try and stop them happening, but they do keep happening. and some of the experience of the relatives caught up in these things, they're pretty similar.
Yeah, I think it's the wider thing that happens is that there are institutions and companies that then come up against people, and institutions and companies, many of them do plan for worst case scenarios, but people and families and the recently bereaved, you don't plan for that sort of thing to happen. And so for me, that's always seemed like one of the things that happens at lots of different levels of life, but certainly when there's huge, significant disasters, all of a sudden you've got people who've just been bereaved, who are dealing with companies who find it easier to be dispassionate and to make the system work for them.
Yeah, and they know how to make the system work for them, and they've usually got huge level of resource that they can apply to it, because quite often in these disasters, there's some reputation defending to be done by companies or by public bodies. And they tend to have a lot of money to throw at it, which families, apart from being shocked and having to deal with the worst thing that's ever happened to them in their lives, they just don't have money stashed away to hire lawyers and do these things. So there are some big issues there. But I think one of the biggest is that families simply aren't at the centre of these proceedings that happen after public disasters, and their needs and their need to find out what happened and why, isn't ever at the centre. I mean, I've talked to loads of families who have been bereaved in public disasters, not only the MV Derbyshire and Hillsborough, but others. When Michael Wills and I were preparing and writing this bill, which we did in 2014, Marchioness families, Lockerbie families, there's loads of examples. And what they all say to you is, we want to find out what happened to our loved one and why. And we want to make sure it never happens again to any other family because it's so horrendous. And that's what families always say that they want. Well, now that doesn't seem like such a big ask to me. But why do we get it wrong time after time after time as a society? And the answer is because our public policy doesn't deal with this situation well. And that's what this bill is really aimed at trying to tackle.
The bill's going to be read on Wednesday. It's going to actually be one of the first to be done in our new remote way of working. One of the key things about Wednesday is trying to ensure that the public advocate, which is what it would be properly resourced and would be located within a government department, but it has to be independent. And I think that's one of the key aspects of the bill as written, isn't it, Maria? It's very, very important that it is able to be part of government, but when it needs to be completely independent of it.
Yeah, the idea is that the person who's appointed will work ad hoc when disasters happen, right? So they won't have to be at work every day. It's not one of those big jobs where something's happening every day. Public disasters happen now and then, and intermittently. And so the idea is this office is there and somebody's appointed ready to take this up the cudgels if it happens. And there's two stages, really. One is that the public advocate themselves decide whether or not a set of circumstances has happened which fits into the definition of public disaster. Is something that they should be involved in. But then the families, or representatives of the families and the survivors, they get to choose whether the public advocate gets involved. So right at the very start, the families have agency, and this is the thing that, in my experience of these disasters over the years, families feel like they don't have any say over what happens and when or how. Whereas with this, it gives them the decision. Look, do you want the public advocate to get involved in this set of circumstances? And it's tremendously important to make the families feel that they have the capacity to control some aspect of what goes on. The reading is Wednesday. Are you looking for people to write to their MPs to make them aware of the fact that they can see this scenario, to basically raise support, or do you just want to create awareness right now that this is an ongoing process? Well, because of the strange situation we find ourselves in, the way that Parliament is meeting, and actually I will have to go into the House of Commons on Wednesday because this counts as public business, so it isn't being done remotely. But the idea of this is it's the first reading, formal first reading. You have to then get a date for the second reading. Now, we're not sure when that will be at the moment. We're not sure because one of the things that's happening tomorrow in the Commons with this change in the way it works is that some of the dates for second reading of private members' business are being pushed back and won't happen during the lockdown. So we don't quite know when it's going to be. I'll probably have to say tomorrow when I'm asked when the bill is going to be read a second time. And in parliamentary terms, that means someday in the future. It doesn't really mean tomorrow. It means the next possible opportunity. We don't quite know when it will be. So what I'm looking for is for people to get their MPs to support it when we get to that second reading. So we don't quite know when that's going to be at the moment.
And the other part of this as well is that it obviously has, you know, the things that we can't talk about. There's obviously that legacy impact there, but there's also the ongoing question marks around Grenfell, which would fall into the category of a bill like this had it actually already passed as being law. And it is a reminder, isn't it, Grenfell, that ultimately we if we don't change what's happened in the past, if we don't change off the basis of what we can learn through being able to speak to the families from Hillsborough and from other disasters, that it will impact people again. And Grenfell's another really good contemporary example of people themselves not being able to speak or act when businesses, governments, councils all can.
Well, I haven't talked or consulted with the Grenfell families, but I've seen reports of the families and survivors and those affected saying pretty similar things to those things that I've heard from families and survivors from other disasters. And one sees reports in the newspapers of these things looking like they might be going wrong again in that particular instance. And I do think there is a public policy issue here. Now, the only thing that worked properly and helped the families get to the truth in Hillsborough was the Hillsborough Independent Panel.
Yeah.
And the key thing about that was it wasn't an adversarial legal process. It relied upon the publication of documentation. It relied upon a data controller having access to all the documents, getting it all published so that you had openness and transparency. Now, the key thing about this public advocate bill is the public advocate that I envisage will be able to do that at an early stage if the families want it done. And the idea is let's stop these things going wrong from an early stage, because I know I'm not a practicing solicitor anymore, but I'm qualified as a solicitor. I know how the law works. I know that once things go wrong, it's much harder to put them right than it is to try and stop them going wrong in the first place. And what I think we lack here in public policy terms is the capacity to give agency to families so that they can get what they need from these processes at the earliest possible stage, so we can keep them on the straight and narrow focus of getting to the truth and finding out what happened in any given set of circumstances. Now, that's what this bill is aimed at doing. Now, this bill does not and will not give full equality of arms in legal terms, change legal aid at inquests and all those big policy issues. This is a small thing that can make a real difference. If I were to characterize it, it's like it keeps everything on the straight and narrow with the family's interests and their agency at the very center of a consideration of all the other processes that have to go on after disasters. You have to have inquests, you have to have court cases of various kinds. But this would, in a simple and pretty cost-effective way from the start, stop things from going wrong using what worked with the Hillsborough Independent Panel. And that is a commitment to openness and transparency from the start to stop things going wrong in the first place. That is why this is, I think, an idea that can work, because it puts right what goes wrong in all of these cases from an early stage, stops them going wrong, and you've then got a policy that's much closer to where we ought to be, I think. And I think this, if we can do it, wouldn't cost the earth, but it would stop instances like Hillsborough, like Grenfell, like many other situations we can think of, the Derbyshire, the Marchioness. It would stop things going off kilter, keep them on the straight and narrow of getting to the truth, getting justice, making sure families have what they need. And then hopefully we won't have to spend 20 years putting right the Derbyshire issue, 31 years trying to sort out Hillsborough with court cases still ongoing. That is what even more agonising for families. When I first met some of the Hillsborough families when I became an MP, and this was in 1997, so, years and years after the disaster, what struck me very strongly was these people were stuck in the moment of the disaster and the 1 or 2 days that followed it and the days that followed after. They couldn't move on. Mm. Now, if we don't stop these things going wrong, that's going to happen to a whole load of other people. And that's what this bill, simple, not hugely expensive in public expenditure terms, that's what this could achieve. And that's why I think it's worth doing. And I also think as the Hillsborough families are getting to the stage where they are going to become more private, the next memorial will be the final memorial. It has been postponed, I know, but it will be the final memorial at Anfield. They're then going to remember their families privately in their own way in future. Their big campaign is coming to an end. This would be a legacy. Because what they said to me right from the early days was, we don't want this to happen to any other families. That's why a lot of them carried on. And this could be a monument to their campaign and a legacy for them. We did something that stopped it happening to other families. I think that would be a great comfort, actually.
Okay, thank you very much to Maria. We will move back over now. I'm on with James Pearce next from The Athletic. We will keep in touch with Maria over this bill, and maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to meet in person and talk about it at some point too, Maria, as it progresses to a second reading. Joined by James Pearce from The Athletic to have a chat about his piece he's written on Being Liverpool, and you called me about it, James. We can have full disclosure. We had a good laugh, it's fair to say, remembering what it was like and how crazy it was. The thing I took from the piece was the extent to which I think there's firstly a little bit of conflict between some of the people featured and the makers of the documentary itself, but the extent to which the documentary makers remain proud of the work but also feel as though it's quite a fair representation of what they saw at the time.
Yeah, I think that was one of the main things that I took from doing it as well. Probably going into it, I think kind of as a Liverpool reporter and as a fan in this city, you think of Being Liverpool and you think of the cringe moments with Brendan Rodgers and Ian Ayre especially. But I think you're right. Yeah, from Michael Bloom, who was the head of original programming at Fox, who was involved in the very initial meetings with Tom Werner, the Liverpool chairman, about the project, and Scott Boggins, the award-winning producer of the show. It was Bloom and Boggins who came across to Merseyside on 2 occasions to kind of sell the project to Kenny Dalglish, who was manager at the time, and then to the players. And yeah, you're right. 8 years on, their kind of perception of it and is very different probably to that of a lot of Liverpool fans, because you're right, they are very proud of it. And also, I think, hopefully what I tried to get across in the piece is, from their point of view, it was mission accomplished in terms of they were asked to produce something which opened Liverpool up to new markets and new fans who maybe weren't familiar with what Liverpool Football Club was all about, and they feel as if they did that.
They really do. I think it's interesting to sort of read there's a conflict there, but also that different players had different perceptions of it. I think I'm very interested in Carragher's take within it, because Jamie now works in the media. He's got that sort of he's gone through that separation, and he's very engaged with the world, as I always say. Jamie really switched on, and I think he feels as though it's not quite what it could have been, but then also simultaneously acknowledges that what it could have been might just be impossible as well. It's it's a really interesting, almost impossibility at the heart of the project.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. Jamie Carragher summed up well in terms of, he said, well, going into it, he was thinking about some of the great British Lions walks and all documentaries that he'd seen previously, and he said it was. He said it wasn't that. He said he felt as if it could have been something a lot better than it eventually was, but by the same token, that acknowledgement that football clubs are incredibly protective, and I think speaking to Michael Bloom and Scott Boggins as well, it was clear that it certainly wasn't like some of the shows these days where clubs have almost total editorial control over it. It was there was a consultation process there, rather than basically the deal with Liverpool was, we will not reveal anything I think Scott Bobbins described it as X's and O's, kind of tactics and strategy. But in terms of everything else, pretty much everything else that they filmed over the course of those months from April through to September was fair game.
Yeah, I think that's the staggering thing. If anything, that's the main thing I took from your piece in terms of the discovery aspect. Because when we chatted about it, I was saying to you, they must have had editorial control. How did the X come out if they had editorial control? So to learn that they broadly speaking didn't, there was a little bit of horse trading over what is or isn't commercially sensitive. But ultimately, they didn't have anywhere near as much control as I think would have expected at the time, but would certainly expect now.
Yeah, 100%. I think the American guys that I spoke to admitted that you're just not going to get that same kind of agreement in place now. I think clubs have become a lot more savvy and want to control things to a greater degree. Yeah, there was essentially almost a committee set up with people from Liverpool. Ian Ayre was one of those, people from Fox, and then people from FSG, and there was a kind of a conversation back and forth about particular things. I think it was interesting. I think it was Michael Bloom in the piece said there was more to the Rodgers Sterling spat in Boston, and that initially Liverpool were keen for that to get taken out completely. I think there was a bit of horse trading there that resulted in an edited version of that going out. But then you had the issue then where Liverpool weren't particularly impressed about the fact that something which they debated long and hard about ended up being used to promote the entire series. I don't think that went down too well. But interestingly, from what I was told, the other things that Liverpool flagged up were really small things, like the picture on Rodgers' wall when he was showing the cameras around his house, but that stayed in. And the other one was, I think it was Rodgers boasting about, or certainly what they felt could be perceived as boasting about the plush new car he had. But certainly Ian Ayre didn't have any issues with the Harley Davidson and the 69 jokes.
It is the strangest thing. I mean, it is a reminder, isn't it? I think that firstly, the football club itself has come a long way. I know to some people, I had retweeted something and a lot of people were saying, "Oh my God, I could never even read the piece. It's so cringy." I think there's a thing there where I do feel a little bit like, come on, it is football. We do get to sort of laugh at ourselves a bit. I think that's fine. And that's certainly the tone that you took in the piece, not being disrespectful, but being able to be a little bit wry. But also, it does tell you the story of the journey the football club's been on as well, I think, since that point. Being able to look at that and realise the amount that firstly FSG have learned, but secondly now how well drilled an operation Liverpool is. But thirdly, they put their own stuff out behind the scenes all the time. Now, it's happening almost daily with the players meeting up, and everybody knows it's there, and everybody responds really positively. And you can do that without necessarily feeling as though you're embarrassing anybody.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It was, you'd have to say Liverpool were ahead of their time in terms of, they were the first major club to go down that route. You think of the likes of Man City and Tottenham and Barcelona, Juventus that have done it since, of course Sunderland as well. But you're right, going back over it, watching the series again, speaking to a lot of people that were involved at a whole lot of different levels, it does make you appreciate where Liverpool has come in the last 8 years. Because even the fuss that's made in that series about the new arrivals, you've got Clive Owen, in hushed tones talking about the arrival of Samid Yezel. And then before that you've got Nuri Sahin, who of course within 4 or 5 months had gone, and Barini and of course Joe Allen were the two kind of big headline signings that summer. So and even without being disrespectful to Channel 5, and I didn't put this in the piece, but it made me realise afterwards when I was kind of reading it back this morning imagine if Liverpool did that now. That is not ended up on Channel 5. I think that in itself was almost a sign of where Liverpool was at that time. Because part of the last episode is that infamous deadline day when, of course, Liverpool were trying to offer Jordan Henderson to Fulham as a mate weight in the Clint Dempsey deal. So yeah, when you think where Liverpool have come from there to here, and I think, of course, it divides opinion. Even reading the comments on the article today, I think a lot of Liverpool fans did actually enjoy the insight, even if it was just the bits in terms of the players' houses. I think
Yeah.
Certainly the senior players felt as if the American guys earned their trust by the end. A lot of that footage was done right at the back end of the project at home with Steven Gerrard and I think Pepe Reina and Lucas Leiva. So I think that gave some kind of insight. But yeah, I think that the big thing for me was how difficult it is trying to create something that caters for your die-hard Liverpool fans.
Absolutely.
And opening the club up to new markets. And in terms of the latter, as Michael Bloom and Scott Boggins say in the piece, it ticked those boxes because it certainly did that. It was sold globally. I think I think it was Michael in the piece said that one of the stats that Tom Werner always talks about is 40% of the entire TV audience in Sweden one night were watching Being Liverpool when that first episode was broadcast.
Oh, absolutely crazy stuff. Do read the piece. It is terrific. Really, really fascinating, as James says, into a piece of storytelling that took place many years ago. Thank you very much to him. Sign up to The Athletic. It is theathletic.co.uk/the Anfield Wrap. Let's get back over now to Adam, Gareth and Phil. Welcome back. Hope those conversations were good. I haven't had them yet, if we're all honest about it. But, we are where we are. I am with Adam, Gareth and with Phil. And last week we chatted primarily about Nico Williams with reference to what this break will mean for him, but also his pathway through to the Liverpool side. One of the things we discussed is that Trent aside, Liverpool haven't been that good at pathways in recent years, but then that's because they're trying to be the greatest team ever to play association football. And that's what makes all of this difficult, Gareth. I think Rhian Brewster's walked into that wall this season, maybe more than any other player. He's had still issues around injury, but I think more than anyone else, he goes away. He couldn't have done that much more in pre-season, and then he can't really get on the pitch from a Liverpool point of view. And I think that's because if you're trying to basically blow Manchester City away, you haven't got room for players on learning curves. So I don't quite know when that changes for Rhian, to be quite honest with you. It is difficult, isn't it, to work that out, because when you've got to be as good as Liverpool have got to be, it's hard to give youngsters genuine opportunities. Yeah,
that is the thing. And I think, you looked at it and we all expected them to be making a contribution. He was doing well. A slot was left for him, if you like, in the squad. So, everyone said, okay, well, he's not going to fill that slot because that is Rhian Brewster's slot. He's going to come in, he's going to get game time, he's going to get his chance. Thing is, when he did get his chance, he didn't really take that chance. He didn't do anything where you were like, you've got to play him the following week. He's done something special there. Maybe the nerves got to him, maybe the situation got to him. And, he is only a young lad, so that is absolutely fair enough if that happened. But it's that thing where you want Liverpool to develop players, but you also want Liverpool to compete, and sometimes those two things clash. And I think Rhian Brewster's a sort of perfect example of that. In that, you could see that he's like, you can see the manager likes him, you can see he gets on with players, he's mates with Oxlade-Chamberlain and things like that, and he was doing little videos and stuff like that, and you got the sense that he was a nice lad, did some nice interviews. So everything pointed in the direction of this would be his time, this would be his season, this would be where he would shine. And it just hasn't happened for him. And he's gone away on his loan spell, done okay there. And now they're starting to talk about can we keep him? Will Liverpool maybe let him go and things like that? And as you say, it is the thing that Liverpool are competing at the very, very top of world football now. And so is Rhian Brewster ready for that? I mean, everything right now says probably not.
It's really tricky, Adam, with an eye on whatever next season becomes, because it is difficult with the pandemic disruption. There was a lot of talk of Liverpool looking for a fourth, almost sheer quality forwards. There was a lot of links, to Timo Werner as an example. But you do sort of firstly wonder if there could be a knock-on effect. We're only really guessing at this phase around that. But if that happens, well, the one thing you would presume is that a fourth real quality forward would lead to Origi making way. And then you end up in a situation where it may well be actually a little easier for Brewster or Elliott, for that matter, to push their way in that they won't be getting past Liverpool's first substitute, if you sort of see what I mean.
Yeah, and I think that the Timo Werner links are still very much alive as well, aren't they? With reports that he's learning English and stuff. And I mean, he might just have learned "please buy me" in English, because that seems to be his kind of his overall thing that he seems to be saying at the moment with everything he does. But I think, look, I'll be honest, I'd like us to sell Origi, because I'm sort of done having to watch him. And he scores big goals, and he's scored, he'll forever be remembered for what he's done. But his overall contribution for me, I don't think it's his fault, because I think he wants to be playing central, but he's never going to play central in this Liverpool team. So he just doesn't do enough on the left. So if Ryan Brewster is the one that comes back in and he looks like he will do more from that position, then great. And as you say, they won't then have that jump to make. But I mean, I remember last, in the summer, I was sort of banging the drum very much on social media to say, I want us to buy another forward. I want, these three can't. They're going to get injuries. They're going to get problems. And the answer that I got from everybody was, we've got Ryan Brewster. We've got Ryan Brewster. And I was like, but he's literally never played a senior game for the club. So we have no idea how good Ryan Brewster is going to be. Hopefully he's a world beater. But, I agree with Gareth of kind of, where he's ended up. Now, I think you can read that in one of two ways. You can read it as the manager looking at it and going, I don't think he's cut out for this. Or you could read at it and going, he needs the experience. He needs to go and get experience, and he can't get it here. So let's send him off to somewhere where he will get that experience, and then we can see where he's at in the summer. Obviously, this is before the world ended and things, but that was probably his thought process. And so if they come back next season, let's say we sell Origi, bring in Timo Werner, all of a sudden it does feel a little bit more like that they are a front four rather than what it is at the moment of a front three and the first choice substitute. So it would be easier for one of the younger players to be able to get minutes, because the front four will presumably be interchanged until and unless one of them gets injured, and then but there's just so many moving parts, aren't there, in these things, that is why I'm glad I'm not a manager.
There are a lot of moving parts. I think one of the ones that hurts Brewster, I think Adam actually picks up on it whilst talking about Origi, Phil. One of the things that hurts Brewster is that you do feel as though he needs to play central. And Adam's right that I think Origi needs to play central now as well. His next move, that should be part of his next move. But he can do something out wide. It does seem to me as though Brewster, broadly speaking, needs to play central. And if Liverpool are playing a proper game of football, and Roberto Firmino can't play centre forward, Mo Salah will stick his hand up absolutely immediately, and the manager will be the manager and have a little look at that. Or Mane will stick his hand up, and I think that's one of the things that hurts Brewster in this conversation as well.
Definitely does. And then you see when he does play, he played the Arsenal game and the MK Dons game in the League Cup, and like the front three against MK Dons was Brewster in the middle, Jones on the left, and Elliott on the right. Now he's not going to look anywhere near the player he would look if it was actually Salah on the right and Mane on the left, just because they're such much better players who are able to give him more space, but B, also give him the ball in better areas and make him look more dangerous. But there's actually a really interesting comparison with Arsenal at the minute and Martinelli in terms of they're both, Martinelli's a year younger, but they're both sort of bright young prospects. Arsenal, because they're nowhere near as good as us, and aren't in as high pressure the position in terms of if Arsenal lose, it's not like a complete disaster. Arsenal lose games, they're not good. People aren't going to go, well, the problem we lost today is because we played an 18-year-old Brazilian lad. That's a problem that we would have if we started Ryan Brewster. But Arsenal are able to give him games, and then when he's played games, he looks really good. And it's an advantage for him because of the circumstances of the team he's in, and it's a real problem for Brewster, I think, in terms of how does he get in this team? Because
does that change for Elliott, Phil? Or do you think Elliott's going to run into the same problem?
I think he's going to have the same problem. I just don't see how you sort of shoehorn that youngster into starting games. They've almost got to end up in a situation like Trent did. Trent didn't get into this team necessarily because we thought, oh, fantastic, we'll stick him in. Would Trent have got in as much as he did if Nathaniel Klein hadn't got injured in the pre-season 2017? He might have done, but it certainly gave him a massive advantage in that we had to go, well, we haven't got another right back here, so we can buy another right back, or we can split between Joe Gomez and Trent, and that's what we did. And then we realised how good Trent was.
One of the problems I think they have, Gareth, is again, Phil's put his finger on it to an extent. I'd say there is the idea that I'd love to see Elliott playing off the right, being the sort of footballer he is, with Henderson, Wijnaldum behind him. Salah, say, through the middle, and Mane left. I'd love to see what would Elliott do with players of that quality, making those runs, getting them on the ball earlier, all of that sort of stuff. But one of the problems that he has, that Nico Williams has, that Brewster has, that Curtis Jones has, is that there's all of them. And it's very, when you've got just one young player coming through, I would argue if you've got one really, really good young player, it actually clarifies your thinking a little bit more than the idea that you've got sort of 4 of them. And I think that that's one of the things that makes it, as I say, tricky for Elliott, and that you can make the same case for Elliott about playing with better players that you can make for Brewster. Curtis Jones looks like he wants to be on the pitch with better players. He looks like he comes to the boil then. Williams, you'd like to see what he's like at centre-half when he's got Gomez next to him so he can maybe push forward a little more. Do you know what I mean? You can go through all of this, but you end up, we're never really going to pick all 4 of them in the same 11.
No, absolutely. And I like what Phil talks about there, because there is, around all these young players, there is always like a randomness. Like, like, God forbid the situation, but imagine like, all of a sudden like 2 or 3 of your starting 11 go down with something or whatever, and all out at the same time.
For like a couple of months.
Yeah, then all of a sudden that you're getting your opportunity to shine one way or another, and then it's up to you to take that opportunity. Whereas otherwise, as we're all saying here, really, I think you don't see where you get in other than in competitions that aren't top priority for Liverpool. So like the League Cup, like when we've got an FA Cup tie against lower league opposition, basically where we've seen them so far. I mean, with Elliott, I think it's worth remembering, obviously he's only 17 years old, so there's no desperation to do something really quickly with him. And, perhaps for him and for Brewster, if we are talking about loans again, and we know that, Klopp has got a bit of a love-hate relationship with loans, like some of them he seems delighted with how that's worked out, and others he seems absolutely furious how it's worked out. So it's finding the right one, and I know Liverpool try to mitigate around that, saying, well, if you're going to take him, you've got to play him and all that, but there's only so much of that you can do, really. I mean, if you're the manager on the other end, you're a bit like, well, hang on, he's playing shite, and you're telling me I've got to play him, really? So, I mean, with Brewster now, he's scoring goals in the Championship, but we all know, obviously, the Premier League's a completely different league, so could he get a loan, maybe bottom end of the Premier League, middle of the Premier League, and see how he does there? Elliott the same, because you get a move top end of the Championship, bottom end of the Premier League, see how he does. But you got Wilson doing that, haven't you? And I think most of us don't really see Wilson getting in anywhere either. He's boosted his stock, his numbers have gone up. We're probably going to get a decent price for him when we sell him, but that's what we're going to do. Like, he's not going to suddenly come back and play a lot of games for Liverpool.
This is the thing, is that it's so difficult with loan players, isn't it, Adam? Because if Brewster goes bottom end of the Premier League, for instance, then it's almost, yes, he's playing against Premier League defenders, but the flip side is he's not getting Liverpool quality service, so he ends up sort of being put into a bit of a situation there. Elliott, we know he's a slight lad, he's very determined, but he's a footballer who probably needs a little bit of looking after, and again, being on the better side just helps you play your football. The idea of having to absolutely gut your way through football matches is a different thing. It's almost a different challenge, and it is so difficult, isn't it, to work out how to get the best out of these young footballers, but it's something that we all want from our football club to try.
Definitely, and I think that part of the thing is for the manager and for his backroom staff and stuff. There will obviously be things that they're looking for, and those sorts of points that you've made will be mitigated. They will say, look, we know that the service isn't going to be as good, and etc. But what we want to, so for example, I think with Wilson, I think they've sent him off with the idea of, we want to see how much he's involved in games, how much he gets involved all over the pitch in the areas that he would need to be involved in games to be able to fit with this Liverpool team. And I think the casual observer can look at him banging free kicks in and scoring spectacular goals and saying, he's got to have a chance, he's got to get a chance. But any Bournemouth fan you speak to will say he's not in most games. He's just not involved in them. He doesn't do the job. He doesn't do the work that you need to do for a top club. So you could send Brewster, for argument's sake, to Bournemouth, and he might not score loads of goals, but the management team might look at it and go, yeah, but look at his tracking back, look at what he's doing to help the defence out, look at his positioning. The only reason he hasn't scored more is because they're shite at crossing it. Whatever the argument might be. So you do feel that there is a chance for them at a different club, either high-end Championship, low-end Premier League, if they're doing if the manager's saying to them, look, this is what I want from you, this is what you need to prove to me when you're at Leeds or wherever it is. But if they don't then prove it, and I don't think Wilson has, you can't then say, well, they should get a chance in the Liverpool team because they're not doing enough.
Okay, thank you very much indeed to Gareth, to Adam, and to Phil for the Anfield Wrap this week. Thank you very much also to Maria and to James. Hopefully you've enjoyed our show. Do spread the word, let people know what we're about. We're here in partnership with The Athletic. If you want to sign up, it is theathletic.co.uk/the Anfield Wrap. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time today. Stay safe, look after one another. Hopefully not much more of the lockdown scenario to work through, but we will see how it all goes. Hope you're enjoying yourselves. Do subscribe to the Anfield Wrap if you haven't already. Do consider doing so. Loads of fantastic both video and audio there for you as and when you're ready. But until next week, take it easy.